Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In a city where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye, there lived a man who had it all: wealth, power, and influence. His name was Nathaniel Crane, a billionaire with a reputation that could shake any business empire. But despite all his success, something was missing. Nathaniel was used to getting whatever he wanted: business deals, luxury cars, even people. However, there was one thing he had not been able to secure: the perfect marriage, one that aligned with his ambitious goals. Enter Olivia Sanders. Olivia was beautiful, smart, and desperately in need of a lifeline. She worked as an event planner, constantly juggling clients, deadlines, and bills. Despite her undeniable charm, Olivia had yet to break free from the financial strain that weighed heavily on her shoulders. That was when Nathaniel made her an offer she could not refuse. "You sign this contract, and I'll pay you enough money to change your life. Just pretend to be my wife for 6 months. No emotions, no strings attached. You'll play the role, and I'll pay you handsomely." Olivia was skeptical. She had heard rumors about Nathaniel's cold, calculating nature. But what choice did she have? She was drowning in debt and struggling to make ends meet. The money was enough to settle everything and more. She could handle 6 months of pretending. What was the harm? It was supposed to be a simple business arrangement. A fake marriage, a fake life. No feelings, no complications. But as they stood together on the steps of a grand mansion, posing for the photographers, something unexpected started to stir inside Olivia. Was it the way Nathaniel's strong arm wrapped around her waist? Or was it the way his gaze softened, just for a moment, when no one was looking? Nathaniel, for all his success, had always kept his heart guarded. His world was about control, about never showing vulnerability. Yet, the presence of Olivia, with her quiet strength and undeniable beauty, made him feel something he hadn't in years: an unsettling pull that threatened to crack the carefully constructed walls he'd built around himself. They were bound together by a contract, but was it possible for their arrangement to stay fake? Or would the lines between business and real emotions blur? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In a city where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye, there lived a man who had it all: wealth, power, and influence. His name was Nathaniel Crane, a billionaire with a reputation that could shake any business empire. But despite all his success, something was missing. Nathaniel was used to getting whatever he wanted: business deals, luxury cars, even people. However, there was one thing he had not been able to secure: the perfect marriage, one that aligned with his ambitious goals. Enter Olivia Sanders. Olivia was beautiful, smart, and desperately in need of a lifeline. She worked as an event planner, constantly juggling clients, deadlines, and bills. Despite her undeniable charm, Olivia had yet to break free from the financial strain that weighed heavily on her shoulders. That was when Nathaniel made her an offer she could not refuse. "You sign this contract, and I'll pay you enough money to change your life. Just pretend to be my wife for 6 months. No emotions, no strings attached. You'll play the role, and I'll pay you handsomely." Olivia was skeptical. She had heard rumors about Nathaniel's cold, calculating nature. But what choice did she have? She was drowning in debt and struggling to make ends meet. The money was enough to settle everything and more. She could handle 6 months of pretending. What was the harm? It was supposed to be a simple business arrangement. A fake marriage, a fake life. No feelings, no complications. But as they stood together on the steps of a grand mansion, posing for the photographers, something unexpected started to stir inside Olivia. Was it the way Nathaniel's strong arm wrapped around her waist? Or was it the way his gaze softened, just for a moment, when no one was looking? Nathaniel, for all his success, had always kept his heart guarded. His world was about control, about never showing vulnerability. Yet, the presence of Olivia, with her quiet strength and undeniable beauty, made him feel something he hadn't in years, an unsettling pull that threatened to crack the carefully constructed walls he'd built around himself. They were bound together by a contract, but was it possible for their arrangement to stay fake? Or would the lines between business and real emotions blur? As the days passed, Olivia's world slowly began to shift. What was supposed to be a simple arrangement, a fake marriage for a billionaire with no strings attached, was starting to feel more complicated. She told herself every day that she was just playing a role, but the boundaries between her act and reality were beginning to blur. Nathaniel Crane, the man who had once seemed like an untouchable figure of wealth and power, was now someone she couldn't stop thinking about. She saw him in the boardrooms, in the lavish parties, in the quiet moments when the world around them seemed to fade. At first, Olivia tried to keep her distance, reminding herself that this was all for money, for stability. But there were moments, like when Nathaniel had taken her hand at a charity gala, his fingers brushing against hers, that made her heart beat faster in a way she couldn't control. It was hard not to notice how protective he was of her when the media tried to pry into their relationship. He would step in, with an intensity that was both surprising and comforting, guiding her away from uncomfortable questions with a calm but firm presence. The public expected the perfect couple, and Nathaniel was determined to deliver. But behind the scenes, there was an unspoken tension between them. Olivia wasn't sure how much of Nathaniel's charm was part of the act, or if there was something more beneath the surface. She had no idea that Nathaniel was starting to feel the same way. He wasn't used to this kind of vulnerability, and the idea of letting anyone in was foreign to him. Yet, with Olivia, it felt different. As they spent more time together, Nathaniel noticed the small things, how Olivia would smile softly when she thought no one was looking, or how she would laugh at the simplest jokes, as if she was savoring the moment. He had expected her to be a typical, arranged partner, someone who would do their job and leave. Instead, he found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. But there were still barriers between them. Olivia was no fool. She knew this was still just a contract, a business arrangement, and emotions shouldn't get involved. But as they sat together for dinner one evening, the conversation taking an unexpectedly personal turn, she couldn't help but feel the pull of something real. Nathaniel was talking about his childhood, something he never did in public. He spoke of his father's high expectations, of the pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness. It was a rare glimpse into the man he had become, and for the first time, Olivia saw him not just as the billionaire but as someone who had been shaped by the weight of his own past. "Do you ever feel like it's all just a performance?" Olivia asked quietly, unsure if she should be opening this door. Nathaniel's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, she saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. "Every day," he admitted, his voice low. "But it's the only way I know how to survive." The conversation lingered between them, an unspoken understanding hanging in the air. Olivia's heart fluttered, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. She had no time for this. She had to stay focused on the reason she was here. But Nathaniel's words echoed in her mind long after the evening ended. The following days brought more moments of connection. They were still playing the part of the perfect couple in public, but the lines were blurring. Nathaniel would text her little things, like asking how her day went or making sure she was okay after a long meeting. He was being thoughtful in a way that made her question her own feelings. Was it just a part of the act, or was there something more? And if there was something more, could she trust it? One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of interviews and meetings, Olivia found herself sitting on the balcony of their shared apartment. She watched the city lights twinkle in the distance, feeling a mix of exhaustion and confusion. Her phone buzzed, and when she looked down, it was a message from Nathaniel, "I'll be home soon. Don't wait up for me if you're tired." It was a small gesture, but it felt different. It wasn't just a text from her husband, it was a message from someone who was genuinely concerned about her. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to push aside the growing feelings she had for him. She couldn't get lost in this. Not when everything was so fragile. Nathaniel arrived later that night, stepping into the apartment with his usual confident stride. But as his eyes met hers, something shifted. There was a tension in the air, a charge that neither of them had been able to ignore. He moved closer, and for the first time, Olivia saw him hesitate. The walls he had so carefully built around himself seemed to crack, just for a moment. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. For a second, neither of them spoke. And then Nathaniel, in a voice softer than she had ever heard, said, "Olivia, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what we're doing anymore. But I think I'm starting to care." The words hung in the air, and Olivia's heart raced. She didn't know how to respond. She had signed up for a fake marriage, a contract, and this was not part of the plan. But as she looked into his eyes, she felt the pull of something real, something that neither of them could control. The days that followed Nathaniel's confession felt like a whirlwind. Olivia tried to stay focused on her role, reminding herself that she had agreed to this arrangement for one reason only: financial security. But despite her best efforts to keep her emotions in check, something inside her had shifted. The lines between their fake marriage and real feelings had become nearly impossible to distinguish. Nathaniel had said the words, but could she trust them? Was he just saying it to maintain the facade, or was there something deeper there? She couldn't deny that his presence had begun to affect her in ways she hadn't anticipated. His thoughtful gestures, his quiet concern, it was hard not to feel something in return. But she had to be careful. After all, this was a contract, a deal, not a love story. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. Meanwhile, Nathaniel seemed to be wrestling with his own emotions. The confident billionaire who had built his empire on control and logic was now questioning everything he thought he knew about relationships. Olivia had started to crack the walls he'd spent years carefully constructing around his heart. At first, he had convinced himself that this was just another business transaction, an arrangement to keep up appearances for the public. But the more time he spent with her, the more he realized that it wasn't just about appearances anymore. It wasn't just about the press conferences, the photo ops, or the perfect couple image. It was about Olivia. He couldn't help but notice how her laugh brightened the room or how her eyes sparkled when she talked about her work, her passions. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something he couldn't explain. He had always prided himself on being unemotional, on keeping his personal life out of the public eye, but Olivia made him feel things he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The worst part was that he wasn't sure if he could trust himself. His life had been built on control, and now it felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The tension between them was palpable. Every glance, every touch, every small moment they shared felt loaded with meaning. They were both playing a part, but the boundaries were starting to fade. As much as they tried to keep their emotions in check, their growing attraction to one another was undeniable. It came to a head one evening at one of the many charity events they attended. Nathaniel had taken her by the arm as they made their way through the crowd, posing for photos and shaking hands with influential figures. It was all part of the show, part of the performance they had both agreed to. But as they reached a quieter part of the venue, away from the flashing cameras and prying eyes, Olivia felt the weight of Nathaniel's hand resting on her back, guiding her with a touch that was both tender and possessive. "I'm not used to this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was referring to the intimacy of the moment, the connection they had built despite everything. Nathaniel glanced at her, his jaw tightening as if he was holding something back. "I'm not used to it either," he admitted, his voice low. "But maybe, we don't need to be." Olivia's heart skipped a beat at his words, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. But before anything could happen, they were interrupted by a sudden shout from across the room. Nathaniel's attention snapped back to the crowd, his expression hardening as he turned to face the source of the disturbance. The moment was over, just like that. Olivia couldn't help but feel disappointed, though she quickly pushed the feeling aside. She couldn't afford to get caught up in the fantasy of it all. This was still just a contract. Just a business deal. But later that night, as they returned to the apartment, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of strangers, but the kind of silence shared by two people who were trying to figure out what came next. They had crossed some invisible line, one that neither of them was ready to acknowledge, but both of them felt it. Olivia found herself standing at the kitchen counter, her mind racing. She couldn't help but think about Nathaniel's words, *maybe we don't need to be used to this, was that an invitation? Or just another line, another part of the act? She glanced over at him, watching as he removed his jacket and walked toward the living room. For the first time, she wasn't sure what to think. He was the billionaire with everything, and she was just the woman he'd hired for the role. But something had changed between them. Something neither of them could ignore. The next morning, the tension was still there, hanging in the air between them. Nathaniel seemed distant, colder than usual, as if the night before had unsettled him. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything between them. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. She wasn't sure if either of them was ready for what was coming next. The days following that quiet tension felt heavier than ever. Olivia found herself waking up each morning with a knot in her stomach, unsure of what kind of interaction she would have with Nathaniel that day. They were still pretending, still playing their roles, but something had shifted between them. She could feel it. In the air, in the way he looked at her sometimes, like he was seeing her for the first time, as if the walls around him were starting to crumble. It made her wonder if the same was happening to her. Was she truly just pretending? Or had she crossed some line and started feeling things she wasn't supposed to? Nathaniel, for his part, was equally unsettled. The man who had spent years managing every detail of his life with precision and control was now facing the one thing he couldn't control, his emotions. Olivia's presence was beginning to consume him in ways he hadn't expected. The little things she did, the way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about something she cared about, made it impossible to ignore how deeply she was affecting him. He was still holding on to the idea that this was just a business arrangement, that he was in control, but he could feel the truth slipping through his fingers. He had tried to stay distant, to keep the boundaries between them clear, but it wasn't that simple anymore. One evening, after a particularly draining day, Olivia found herself alone in their shared apartment. Nathaniel was at a meeting, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. She sat down on the couch, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers to. What was happening between them? Why did she feel this pull toward him, despite knowing how dangerous it was? She was snapped from her thoughts when Nathaniel walked in, his presence filling the room like it always did. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that neither of them could avoid any longer. He glanced at her, his eyes softening for just a moment before he spoke. "We need to talk," he said, his voice unusually serious. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. It was the last thing she had expected him to say. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "About this," he gestured between them, the invisible line that had once seemed so clear now completely erased. "About us." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, laden with the weight of everything they hadn't said. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself meeting Nathaniel's gaze, her pulse quickening. "Nathaniel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We both know what this is. It's just a contract, a business deal. That's all." His gaze darkened, and for the first time, Olivia saw something raw in his eyes. "Is that all it is?" he asked, his voice low, almost dangerous. She swallowed hard, her heart racing. "That's what it's supposed to be. And what if I told you I didn't want it to be just that anymore?" Nathaniel's words were a confession, a plea, though he didn't quite realize it. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to respond, wanted to tell him that she felt the same way, that she, too, was struggling with this pull between them. But the fear of crossing that line, of giving in to something that could shatter everything, held her back. Instead, she took a step back, breaking the tension between them. "We can't do this, Nathaniel. We agreed. This was never supposed to be more than what it is." Nathaniel's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he looked like he might argue. But then, he seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagging with the weight of his own frustration. "I know," he muttered, his voice a little defeated. "But I can't help how I feel." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Olivia didn't know what to say. She had always told herself she wasn't going to get involved, that this was just a way to secure her future. But now, every part of her was screaming that this was no longer about the money. It was about them. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. For the next few days, things were different. Nathaniel kept his distance, and Olivia tried to keep her emotions in check. They were both avoiding the elephant in the room, pretending that nothing had changed, but the unspoken tension between them was impossible to ignore. It wasn't until a few nights later, at another one of the charity events they attended together, that everything finally came to a head. Nathaniel had been distant all evening, his usual commanding presence replaced by an air of detachment that Olivia found unnerving. She was trying to focus on the conversations around her, but her mind kept drifting back to him, to the way he had looked at her, to the words he had said. Finally, when they were alone for a moment, away from the crowd, Olivia couldn't take it anymore. She turned to him, her heart pounding. "Nathaniel, what are we doing?" she asked, her voice shaky with emotion. Nathaniel turned to face her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice soft. "But I think we're both too far in to walk away now." Olivia's breath hitched as his words hit her like a tidal wave. Was he right? Was there no turning back? The silence between them was deafening, and Olivia could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for Nathaniel's response. His words lingered in the air, heavy with a sense of finality that made her want to run in the opposite direction. "I think we're both too far in to walk away now." The simple truth of it hit her like a punch to the gut. Was he right? Was there really no going back now? She had tried to hold on to the idea that this was just a business deal, that she could compartmentalize her emotions and keep things strictly professional. But everything was changing. Everything was already changing. Olivia looked up at him, her breath caught in her throat, unsure of what to say next. Nathaniel's expression was unreadable, but she could see the same conflict reflected in his eyes. He was no longer the confident billionaire who had hired her for a job. He was just a man, standing in front of her, struggling with the same emotions she was trying so hard to keep under control. "I don't know what to do, Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't plan for this. I never thought it would be like this." Nathaniel reached out, his hand brushing against hers in a tentative gesture that felt like a question. He paused for a moment, as if uncertain of how far he could push. His touch was gentle, as though he was afraid that even the slightest movement might shatter whatever fragile connection they had built. "You don't have to figure it out right now," he said softly, his voice surprisingly tender. "But I need you to know. I don't want this to be just an arrangement anymore. I can't pretend that it is." His words sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. She had always thought that Nathaniel was untouchable, that he was the one who called the shots in this entire situation. But now, he was admitting that he was just as vulnerable as she was. He, too, was caught in this web they had woven together. And for a fleeting moment, she wondered if maybe they could make it work. But reality quickly set in. This was still a contract, still a business deal. No matter how strong the pull between them was, they couldn't just ignore the terms they had agreed to. Olivia pulled her hand back, trying to steady herself. "I don't know if I can do that," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can be with someone who sees me as just a business transaction." Nathaniel looked at her, his jaw tightening, the weight of her words sinking in. He took a deep breath and stepped back, putting some distance between them. The tension between them was palpable, but at the same time, there was a kind of unspoken understanding in the air. Neither of them was ready to give up on what they had built, but neither of them was willing to ignore the risks that came with it. The next few days passed in a blur. Their interactions had become strained, and the once effortless dynamic between them had been replaced with a fragile dance of uncertainty. They were still together, still living under the same roof, but the comfortable silence they had shared before was now replaced with an awkward quiet that seemed to hang between them at all times. At the office, Nathaniel was more distant than ever. Olivia couldn't help but notice the way his eyes would linger on her, how his tone would soften when they spoke, but he kept his distance. It was as if they were both trying to pretend that nothing had changed, even though everything had. Then, a week later, they were invited to another high-profile event. This time, it was a gala for one of Nathaniel's business partners, and the pressure to maintain the appearance of a perfect couple was heavier than ever. They arrived together, stepping out of the car in front of the flashing cameras, their smiles wide and practiced, as if everything was fine. But as the night went on, Olivia could feel the weight of Nathaniel's presence. Beside her, the unspoken tension building with every passing moment. It was during the dinner, when they were seated across from each other, that things finally reached a boiling point. Olivia was trying to focus on the conversation around her, but her mind kept drifting back to Nathaniel, to the way he had looked at her earlier, to the way his hand had brushed against hers in the hallway. The thoughts were overwhelming, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing control. She excused herself from the table, needing a moment to clear her head. As she stepped outside onto the balcony, the cool night air hit her face, grounding her in the present. She leaned against the railing, trying to gather her thoughts, but her mind was racing. What was she doing? Why was she allowing herself to feel this way? Just as she was about to step back inside, she heard a voice behind her. "You okay?" Nathaniel asked, his voice softer than she had heard it all night. She turned around to see him standing there, a hesitant expression on his face. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them felt more charged than ever before. Finally, Olivia spoke, her voice low. "I don't know what this is anymore, Nathaniel. I don't know what we're doing." Nathaniel took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "I don't know either," he admitted. "But I know that I don't want to let go. Not yet." The words hung in the air between them, suspended in the cool night. Olivia's heart raced as she looked up at him. She had never felt more conflicted in her life. Every part of her wanted to say yes, to let herself fall into whatever this was, but there was still so much at stake. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I don't know what to do, Nathaniel," she whispered again. "But I'm scared." Nathaniel reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said softly. "Just know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." The night air was cool against Olivia's skin, but the tension between her and Nathaniel felt suffocating. She stood there, her back leaning against the balcony railing, trying to steady her breath, while Nathaniel remained just a few feet away. The sound of the city below them was distant, as though the world had faded away, leaving only the two of them in this heavy silence. For a moment, Olivia didn't know what to say. Everything had changed. What was supposed to be a fake marriage, a business arrangement that she could control, was slipping out of her grasp. And yet, standing in front of Nathaniel, she couldn't help but feel like she was on the verge of something that could either break her heart or change her life. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I'm scared, Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. I never thought it would get this complicated. I never thought I would start feeling like this. Nathaniel's expression softened as he stepped closer. I know, he said quietly. I didn't expect this either. But I'm not going to walk away from it. I don't want to. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. There was no hint of calculation, no trace of the cold, controlled billionaire she had first met. He was just a man, standing before her, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Olivia's heart began to race again. Her instincts told her to run, to protect herself from getting hurt. But the pull between them was undeniable. What if this ends up destroying everything? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel looked down, taking a deep breath as if the weight of her words had hit him harder than he had anticipated. When he finally met her gaze, there was a quiet determination in his eyes. Maybe it will. But maybe it won't. All I know is that I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep living a life that's based on lies and contracts. I want something real. Olivia felt her chest tighten as the weight of his words sank in. She knew that she couldn't pretend either. She had tried, so hard, to keep this all about the money, to keep her emotions locked away. But she had failed. The lines between business and love had blurred, and she didn't know how to untangle them. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. When she opened her eyes, she looked at Nathaniel with a mixture of fear and longing. I don't know what this is, she said softly, her voice trembling. But I know that I can't keep pretending anymore either. Nathaniel took another step closer, closing the gap between them. This time, neither of them hesitated. He reached out slowly, as if asking for permission, and gently cupped her face in his hands. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as his thumbs brushed over her skin. The moment was fragile, hanging in the balance, but it felt more real than anything that had come before. Then let's stop pretending, Nathaniel whispered. The words sent a jolt of electricity through Olivia's body. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready. She had been so careful, so guarded, but now everything was changing, and there was no way to stop it. Her heart was racing in her chest as she looked into his eyes. I don't want to hurt you, she whispered, the words barely audible. You won't, he said softly, his voice full of conviction. You won't hurt me, Olivia. But we need to face this together. We can't keep running from what we feel. His words were like a promise, but they also felt like a challenge. Olivia's mind raced as she tried to process everything. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? She had come into this relationship with nothing but a desire for financial security. But now, as she stood in front of Nathaniel, she realized that she had wanted more than that. She had wanted something real. And she wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. Nathaniel leaned in slowly, his face just inches from hers, his breath warm against her skin. The space between them was charged with 1,000 unspoken words, with emotions that neither of them had been able to express until now. Olivia closed her eyes, her heart racing as she waited for the moment that was finally happening. Nathaniel's lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, hesitant, as if they were both unsure of what would come next. But soon, the kiss deepened, as if the floodgates of emotion that had been building between them finally broke free. Olivia's hands found their way to his chest, and she pulled him closer, surrendering to the kiss. The weight of the world seemed to disappear in that moment, leaving only the two of them, caught in the gravity of something real, something undeniable. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other as they tried to catch their breath. Olivia looked up at Nathaniel, her heart still pounding in her chest. "I don't know what this means," she said softly. "But I'm willing to find out." Nathaniel smiled, his hand brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Me too," he whispered. "We'll figure it out together." And for the first time, Olivia believed him. In the days that followed, everything between Olivia and Nathaniel felt different. The air between them was charged with something new, something undeniable. They had crossed a line, one they couldn't uncross, and though the weight of their decision was heavy, there was also a sense of relief. Olivia found herself smiling more, not just when Nathaniel was around, but in the quiet moments she spent alone. She felt lighter, freer, as if the shackles she'd placed on her heart for so long had finally been loosened. But that didn't mean the path ahead was easy. They still had a lot to figure out. Despite their feelings for each other, they were still bound by the contract they had signed, and Olivia couldn't shake the nagging doubt that it might all come crashing down. Could something real come from a relationship that had started out so fake? She wasn't sure, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Nathaniel, too, had changed. The man who had once kept everyone at arm's length, who had never allowed anyone to see his true self, was now letting her in. He would send her little messages, checking in on her during the day, asking how her meetings had gone or what she had planned for the evening. It was subtle, but it meant everything to her. He was showing her a side of himself that no one else saw, and for the first time, Olivia felt like she truly mattered to him. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to risk her heart. But she couldn't deny it. He was becoming more than just her fake husband. He was becoming her partner, her confidant, someone she wanted in her life for more than just the money. One evening, after dinner, Nathaniel took her by the hand and led her out to the balcony. The city lights stretched out before them, casting a soft glow over the night. He stood there, looking out at the view, before turning to her. "I don't know where this is going, Olivia," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "But I do know that I don't want to lose you." The words hit Olivia like a wave, crashing over her with unexpected force. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear that. She hadn't realized how much she needed him to say it. She stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in, before finally meeting his gaze. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered. "But I'm scared." Nathaniel took a deep breath, stepping closer to her. "I know. I'm scared, too. But I'm not walking away. I want to do this with you, Olivia. I want to figure this out, together." There was sincerity in his voice, something she hadn't heard before. It wasn't just the billionaire speaking anymore. It was Nathaniel, the man who had been hurt, the man who had built walls around his heart, the man who was willing to let those walls come down for her. Olivia's heart raced, but this time, the fear felt different. It wasn't the fear of being hurt, it was the fear of everything changing. But this time, she wasn't running away. She was ready to take that step, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. Nathaniel leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face before gently kissing her. It was soft, lingering, a promise of something more. Something real. As they pulled apart, Nathaniel's hand rested on her cheek, and for the first time, Olivia felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. Together. The words settled in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt at peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. The days after that night felt like a turning point. Nathaniel and Olivia were no longer just pretending. They were building something real, something that neither of them had expected when they first entered this arrangement. The air between them was no longer filled with tension and uncertainty. Instead, it was filled with possibility, with hope. But even as they grew closer, the reality of their situation was never far from their minds. Olivia still couldn't shake the fear that this would all fall apart. She had lived her life in a world where nothing was ever certain, and she was terrified that this newfound connection with Nathaniel could be just another illusion. Every time she looked at him, a part of her wanted to believe that this could last, that what they were building could survive beyond the contract. But the other part of her was still scared of getting hurt, scared of giving her heart to someone who had once seemed so untouchable. Nathaniel, on the other hand, was trying to figure out how to balance his feelings for Olivia with the world he had built for himself. He had spent so many years keeping people at a distance, avoiding the kind of emotional connections that might make him vulnerable. But now, with Olivia, things were different. She made him feel things he hadn't felt in a long time, things he wasn't sure he even knew how to handle. He had promised her that he wasn't walking away, that they would figure this out together. And he meant it. But as their bond deepened, Nathaniel couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep pretending that everything was perfect. Could their love survive in a world that was so focused on appearances, on business deals and contracts? Could they make it work when everything that had brought them together was built on a lie? The questions kept him up at night, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't care. He didn't want to lose Olivia. He didn't want to lose what they had found together. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Nathaniel and Olivia found themselves back at the apartment, sitting on the couch in comfortable silence. The soft glow of the lamps illuminated the room, casting a peaceful light over everything. Olivia was curled up beside him, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched a movie. It was a simple moment, but it felt like everything they had been working toward, everything they had been afraid of, was finally falling into place. Nathaniel looked down at her, his hand resting gently on hers. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. Olivia looked up at him, surprised by the softness in his tone. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nathaniel paused for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. "I thought this was going to be simple," he said. "Just a contract. Just business. But you've changed everything. I didn't expect to feel this way. I didn't expect to want more." Olivia's heart skipped a beat at his words. She hadn't expected him to say that, hadn't expected him to open up like this. The man who had once seemed so closed off, so guarded, was now showing her a side of himself she hadn't known existed. It made her chest tighten, but it also made her feel something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time: hope. "I didn't expect this either," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't expect to care about you like I do. I thought I was just doing this for the money." But now, she trailed off, unsure of how to finish the thought. Nathaniel's thumb brushed over the back of her hand in a slow, comforting motion. "Now, it's real," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a question all at once. Olivia closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the weight of his words. She had been so afraid of this moment, afraid of letting herself believe that something good could come out of this. But now, with Nathaniel beside her, she felt like she had nothing to fear. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to open her heart. She leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a soft, tender kiss. It wasn't a kiss filled with passion or desperation. It was a kiss that spoke of trust, of vulnerability, of a love that was just beginning to bloom. When they pulled apart, Olivia smiled, her heart lighter than it had ever been. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. Nathaniel smiled back, his eyes full of affection. "Good," he said softly. "Because I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time, Olivia believed him. As the weeks passed, Nathaniel and Olivia's relationship continued to evolve in ways neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a business arrangement, a contract built on necessity and convenience, had slowly turned into something far deeper. They spent more time together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Their lives, once separate and compartmentalized, now intertwined in ways that felt natural. The doubts that had plagued Olivia at the start, whether this was just a temporary thing, whether Nathaniel truly cared, had melted away. Nathaniel, too, had begun to see Olivia not just as his wife in name, but as someone who had become an essential part of his life. He was no longer the man who built walls around his heart. With Olivia, he had found a connection he hadn't even known he was searching for. The more time they spent together, the clearer it became that they were building something real. The love they had once feared would never come to fruition was now undeniable. But despite how far they had come, there were still challenges to face. The world they lived in was one where appearances mattered, where contracts and agreements held weight, and where things weren't always as simple as they seemed. Olivia knew that their relationship would always be questioned, always scrutinized by the people who didn't understand the bond they had formed. There were still moments of doubt, moments when Olivia would catch herself wondering if this was really the life she wanted, if she was willing to put everything on the line for something so uncertain. Nathaniel, too, struggled with the public perception of their relationship. He had always been careful with his image, and now that he was truly letting someone in, it felt like a risk. But no matter the fears or obstacles, they both knew that what they had was worth fighting for. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Nathaniel turned to her with a look of quiet resolve in his eyes. "Olivia," he said softly, "I know we've been through a lot, and there's still so much ahead of us. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. Not just because of the contract, but because I love you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Olivia couldn't speak. She had known, deep down, that this was the truth, but hearing him say it aloud made her heart swell. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not afraid anymore." Nathaniel smiled, his eyes softening as he took her hand. "Then we'll face whatever comes next, together." It was in that moment, surrounded by the quiet comfort of their shared space, that Olivia realized how far they had come. This wasn't just a contract anymore. This wasn't just a fake marriage or a business deal. It was love, real, imperfect, and messy love. And for the first time, Olivia felt certain of one thing: no matter what happened in the future, she and Nathaniel would face it together. She leaned in, kissing him softly, a kiss that spoke of all the trust, the commitment, and the hope they had built. As they pulled away, their foreheads rested together, and in the quiet that followed, neither of them felt the need to say anything more. They knew what they had, and it was enough.